Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and to share my experiences of Fastbrændthed. Because of the interest in the presentation that I did in Swedish a few weeks ago, we decided to record a version in English as well. This also meant that I had to come up with an English expression for Fastbrændthed. Now, the Swedish expression fastbränd is of course a sibling of the expression utbränd. So the sibling of burned out could maybe be burned stuck. Now, a few words about me and about Ability Institute. I'm an economist from Stockholm School of Economics, and for a brief period I also did research there in social psychology and decision theory. But more importantly, I've spent the past 20 years developing work-life and labor market services. To that end, I founded and manage Ability Institute. This is a small research and development organization with 15 people working in Stockholm and Gothenburg. We have many different backgrounds, from career guidance to market modeling to sales. And we have theorists as well as practitioners. So on to today's topic. I will speak about the origin of the concept. I will speak about the relationship to being burned out. I will speak about what you can do about this and maybe who can do something about it. If I start with the origin of the concept, the short answer is, in our career guidance services, we discovered answers to a problem that seemingly had not been properly named or described. As clients found their answers, they started to redefine their journey. They said, "I've not been burned out, I've been burned stuck." Now, my impression is that we already have important tools for dealing with this at an individual level. But there is so much more to explore in terms of creating an understanding among individuals and in society, about catching it early before the problem grows big, and about professionalizing the support we can give. Now, let me quote our host, Ria. Now, Ria describes the Danish relationship to fastbrændthed as reactive. It comes in too late. And career guidance is only rarely used in response to it. Now, with the exception of Ability Institute's collaboration with an insurance company in Sweden, I would say that the situation is the same in Sweden. With that in mind, I'd like to present a somewhat broader empirical background to the research and the development work we have done in this area, while also reminding us of the power of career guidance. Imagine a person who has not been able to get a job for 15 years. This person meets a new problem-solving model and gets a permanent job with a salary of 55,000 Swedish kronor a month. Or imagine a person who's dropped out of school and been at home for a year and a half. This person meets a new problem-solving model and goes out and creates a new job, contributing to regional development. Or a person who's been on sick leave for 7 years, who meets a new problem-solving model and starts working in a job that actually fits them. Imagine also a municipality that uses this problem solving on adults on long-term sick leave. And when economists calculate the effect, they say that the societal benefits average 500,000 Swedish kronor per participant. Or a municipality that works like this with young people, cutting youth unemployment in half in a period of 1 year. And within the next few years, violent crimes fall as well, almost by half in the municipality. Or an insurance company that works like this, with employees in their customer companies, and sick leave falls by 60% in 12 years. All these are real examples from our work, and there's of course great human and economic value at stake here. And it's created largely, of course not exclusively, but largely by proven career guidance. And the core here is enabling individuals to become problem solvers rather than problems to solve. Now, as Ria mentioned before, there are huge untapped societal potential within career guidance. Research and development in work health is hard to reduce to one variable or to a simple causality that can be tested in a randomized double-blind experiment. There are different ways to handle this. The one we used most is triangulation. This simply means that when it's difficult to set up one perfect experiment, you instead try to study the same phenomenon from many different angles. So we work with support at work, preventing sick leave. We work with support to work, helping people to get a job. We help with support getting back to work, which means rehabilitation. And we work with support preparing for work, which means in the school setting and building a good work life. And what we see is that we use the same problem-solving model in all these different settings, and it seems to be valuable. And that in itself strengthens the likelihood that we're onto something, that a model is working. Similarly, there are many different disciplines involved in work health. And no single discipline has all the answers, but all have some answers. The key here is enabling the answers from the different disciplines to talk to each other. This requires quite a bit of patience, but it's manageable. We also work with 3 different activities. We develop services, we deliver the services ourselves, and we provide professional training for others to develop the service or use the services. Now you can compare this with the model used in a university hospital. They deliver treatments, but they also develop new treatments and they train medical staff. And it can be valuable since a lot of interesting learning seems to occur in the intersection between these 3 activities. And finally, I guess you could say that what we do spans from action research and development to basic research. But the key here is that over almost 2 decades, we have tried to systematically look at hundreds of thousands of meetings with tens of thousands of clients and about 500 coaches in about 100 different delivery contexts. And this is what is usually called evidence-based practice. In looking for answers, we try to give more attention to validity than to reliability. That means that we give priority to making sure that we study the right things, that we ask the right questions. And using triangulation over time, we hope also to reach reliability, that we can trust the results. The disadvantage here is that it takes a lot of time. It's easier to set up a single experiment. The advantage is that we get applicable results and effects along the way. We also chose a somewhat odd way of peer review, which is books. We rarely write academic papers. And you could say that I've written one book twice, first in 2006 and then in 2018. And I will probably write it again a third time within the next 5 to 10 years. In these books, you can follow our knowledge development process. So why a textbook? Well, a textbook enables us to synthesize rather than just analyze the individual issues. It enables us and others to see if the answers that emerge are internally consistent. We also invite researchers from different disciplines to study us from the outside. For instance, psychologists. There's a summary and a report available if you contact me on a study they did on preventing sick leave. We also have economists studying the services, and they can calculate the effects of the services. And we write cases where we try to follow up long-term effects of the services. Now, as many of you are researchers, I'd also like to share an idea for a possible project that I would love to do. I would like to let researchers from 5 to 10 different disciplines go through one of our guidance services, which is an individualized service in a group setting, and they would participate as clients. And then afterwards, we would write together on their findings. Now, this may sound strange, but I really believe it could be important. So back to the emergence of being burned stuck. The foundation of everything we do is experience-based career guidance. And it's guidance that is developed and tested to work at a large scale. As Ria mentioned, there are good solutions available, but they're not used systematically and on a large scale. And this brings us to a short history of our development work. We actually started out with digital career guidance. The service we developed 20 years ago is still the best I've seen, but it was not good enough, and we're way too early still. Now, let me clarify. I'm not talking here about digital advice or digital information, but an actual guidance service. And I'm not talking about distance, people sitting at a distance from each other, but guidance through a tool, a digital tool. And I do think we'll get there, but that will have to be a different presentation. Now, following this huge and actually very expensive failure, we started collaboration here drawn in red with two different organizations, one public and one private. Both focused on sick leave, which was a big issue in Sweden at the beginning of this millennium. Now let's take a closer look at these. We started out by studying the two different situations. In the public case, they told us that they were sending clients back and forth between the Swedish Public Employment Agency and the Swedish Social Insurance Agency, and to little effect. We started to interview administrators, clients. We studied the analysis that was made of the clients. We studied the tools and the organization. And what we saw was a tremendous lack of quality and precision in the matching that was done. The analysis was, can this person meet norm criteria or have a norm job? And the individual was largely treated as an object with a deficiency rather than the problem solver. In the private industry, we worked with an insurance company. These individuals had an insurance that compensated them for the financial loss during sick leave. And this, of course, occurred at substantial cost for the insurance company. So, in comparison with the public case, there were lots of professional services involved. However, what we saw was most of these services tried to identify and reduce negative deviations from the norm in the person. There were services available, there were professions available, but the focus was this negative deviation. When we saw the same model for problem solving regarding the organization, there were services available and professions available, but largely focused on the negative deviation. Now, if you add this up, our impression was that the problem-solving model focused on reducing negative norms based on a questionable analysis on whether it was important or if it was even necessary to solve the original problem here. There was low or unclear effect on most of these services, and the interest in working with prevention was there, but there was no model for financing it. Our job, of course, was not just to study the settings, but to find a better approach. There was something, though, that complicated the question, but also made it more interesting, because the two situations had very different conditions. In the public setting, we had to work with groups. We needed a scalable, completely individualized career guidance service for a group setting. In the private case, we could not meet the individuals in group for privacy reasons, so we needed a scalable solution for an individual setting. Now, to become a bit more clear, let me just give one example of the problem solving that a client may encounter in this type of setting. So why is Mirjana not working? Some would say, well, she's under medical investigation, so that makes her unfit for the finding a job. Some said she does not seem to feel well mentally. Some said, "Oh, there's an attitude problem before we can get started here." Some said she must be motivated first, or there's an underlying social problem that prevents her from working. Maybe they said she lacks necessary skills, or that she had to complete her language training first. Or they explained that, well, it's because of the labor market in this area. Now, if we look at these explanations with different eyes, we might see something different. If we say, well, are there people under medical investigation that go to work? Well, there are. Actually, most people under medical investigation go to work. And it's an unusual circumstance to be completely free, perfect of any medical problems. Are there people that do not feel well mentally that work? Well, actually, most people that do not feel mentally well do go to work. Some of them feel better from working, some of them worse, but most go to work. Are there people with an attitude problems at jobs? Well, certainly there are. Are there people that are not motivated when they go to their job on Monday morning? Yes, there are. Are there people with social problems that go to work? Well, most of them do. And for some of them, work is the only functioning place in their everyday life. Are there people that lack the necessary skills for their jobs? Yes, there are. Are there people that do not speak the language well that work? Well, most people that do not speak the language well do work. Are there people working in rural townships, for instance? Well, certainly they do. Now, the explanations here focus on shortcomings of the unemployed or those on sick leave. They ignored that these issues are also found in those who work. Still, the explanations were widely used and accepted. So the main problem here is the problem-solving model. What is lacking? Well, you could say that Mirjana has poor marketing. So what is meant with marketing here? Well, it's marketing in its most basic form. It's bringing something to a market. And to be successful, you have to know what precisely am I bringing to the market? And where precisely in the market is this useful? And finally, how can I build a relationship with my part of the market? And what I'm saying is that we're simply wrong when we, in selected dimensions, try to make the unemployed or those on sick leave or those burnt out more as a statistical average of those currently not having this problem. An averagely defined shortcoming does not say very much about each individual's prospects. They are not a good foundation for building solutions. I was interviewed by Dagens Nyheter, which is Sweden's largest daily newspaper, and after the interview, they wrote this: "We do not have to be perfect to have a job. If you look at those you know who do have a job, you know it's true." So what I'm saying is that we're letting Mirjana down. We're not giving her the conditions needed for her to understand whose problem she's a solution to, or even that she is a solution rather than a problem. So our problem here is the problem-solving model, not Mirjana. What is the alternative then to problem-solving reduced to trying to decrease shortcomings, identifying by comparing averages? Well, again, we didn't find a word in Swedish. We had to invent a new one, and we call it rättsökning. Now, we said we needed to complement problem-solving based on felsökning with problem-solving based on rättsökning. Again, I'm not sure how to translate this. We talk about problem-solving and troubleshooting in English when we focus on the negatives. So maybe something that like resource mining could be used in English. And what is this? Well, it's not an attitude, it's an activity. It's something you do. It's not to ignore or think positively about obstacles or problems. It is to face these problems head on but do focused work to find the resources and recipes we can to build solutions around and beyond these problems. It may still be relevant to identify the obstacles and the problems, but you do need to identify the resources to build the solutions. You can compare this with the basic problem solving in medicine. Again, there's the focus on problem at the heart even of the language, problem solving. So, healthcare. In healthcare, the medicine or the treatment is something that comes from the outside. We select the treatment of medicine based on an identified deficiency, a negative deviation from the norm. And in order to use it, it has to work for many. It has to be suitable for many of those with this deficiency. In the labor market, though, the medicine is in the individual. Now, it turns out that the individual is largely unaware of having this medicine. So how do you access it? How do you uncover or mine these resources that we need to solve the problem? Well, it's a process that Socrates would call mageutics. It's about uncovering or mining these resources. And the answers are not linked to the deficiency. They are linked to resources. This means, for instance, that you should not put all persons with a certain deficiency or negative norm deviation in one group, because they don't need the same answer other than the same process possibly. The answers, they are unique. They depend on the resources of this particular individual. To be a bit more specific, the answer to a back injury, a language limitation, a missed degree, a burnout are different depending on what resources each individual has available and what approach suits this particular individual best. And we have to build this while still ensuring quality and scalability. If this hypothesis is correct, then it has major consequences not only for practice, but also for research. This would mean that studies that primarily seek a simple causal link between a group's obstacles and adding something from the outside, they ask the wrong questions and therefore are at a loss for answers. And I want to be honest here, this is how I perceive a lot of the current research in work health. The researchers are not finding any clear answers simply because they're asking the wrong questions. The answers are not that difficult to find, but we're looking for them in the wrong places. The deviation from the norm is not the problem. Unemployment, being stuck, or on sick leave is the problem. So let's have a look at this resource mining, this rättsökning. In essence, it's classical, experience-based career guidance. So we need tools to build a detailed understanding of the resources that each individual has available for their unique problem solving. And we need to build an equally detailed understanding of the environment that is relevant to this particular individual. A problem solving here is where your understanding, this is a type of problem solving where your understanding of the labor market as a whole is not very interesting. This means that empirical information based on averages rarely provide us with answers. However, the individual's personal labor market is very interesting. The individual's own empirical data often provide not only one, but usually a multitude of good answers. It's almost as if the aggregate here is the enemy of the individual, not least for those who do not fit the model, the same people that we most often force the models onto or upon. They are not helped by repeated use of the norms that we've already proven not to contain the relevant answers. So, an example. On average, a workplace of type A may be better than a workplace of type B. However, for many, the type A workplace can be what actually causes their sick leave. For instance, what one person experiences as freedom under responsibility, another person describes as a dangerous chaos that is threatening their health. Still, researchers and professionals often seem to be content with questions like, how should the norm individual or the norm workplace be? I'm not saying that it is not relevant at all, but I do realize that it's a lot easier to study these norms, but harmful to individuals and society if this is the only analysis made. With the help of career guidance, we can find answers in the details, for instance. Individuals have resources that they're aware of. You can see them to the left here. And then they have the actual resources, but they need our help, professional help, to identify them. They also have known uses of these resources, but the actual use of them is much larger. So there's a large unexplored potential for this individual. By opening up this unexplored potential, we can increase the solution set in a way that enables work and health. We can also, if we want, put a moral philosophical perspective on this. Giving a person this understanding could be a step in a civilization process. It would be opening up the possibility for the individual to not only learn things, but to actually understand their resources and their potential. Another important dimension is this: working with combinations of different types. Now, in our work, we always use experience-based tools. We never use tests. Not because tests would be wrong in their answers, but because people are much more likely to believe in, and even more importantly, to act on the results when they see them in their own experiences. So we look at the individual's unique experiences and extract an understanding of the individual's resources from them. The puzzle pieces we uncover can then be combined in hundreds of different ways. And if we continue with the moral philosophical issue here, Karl Marx warned us of alienation, losing contact with our abilities and what we can create, not least because of the division of labor. Now, this is almost impossible. Seeing and making use of the individual's many dimensions to the benefit of employers, employees, and society as a whole. A last short example of uncovering and understanding resources. We need to distinguish between having resources and wanting to use them. Now, think about this. Who would you hire? Someone who has the knowledge to do the job, but doesn't want to do it anymore. Or someone who really wants to do this particular job, but so far lacks the knowledge. You would most probably choose the one who really wants and hope for learning. When someone has the knowledge but doesn't want to, that's a really difficult situation for both the manager and the individual. You could also ask yourself, who of these two people is most likely to be stuck in the wrong job? Who is burned stuck? Now, in many of these problem-solving processes regarding human resources, most people seem to focus on matching knowledge, and they underestimate the importance of will. They underestimate for how well work is done and for health. And maybe people ignore the will dimension precisely because they feel that they have no alternatives. But using the tools we have just talked about, we can open up a greater solution set and thereby reducing the effects of this limitation. These are just a few examples. There's much more we can do to contribute to precision in the matching. Now, precision in matching is central in all the different services I've mentioned. And we actually work with the same process with a newly fired CEO and a dropout from school. All this may sound quite easily, but it's difficult. It's General career guidance or general conversational tools will not do the trick. These are very specific tools needed for a pedagogically very demanding process. It's just as professionally demanding to discover the resources of a 17-year-old dropout as to explore the person's social problems. And it's just as professionally demanding to discover the possibilities of a person on sick leave as to investigate the person's problems. However, in Sweden, when examining problems, we use well-established professions. But when building the solutions, we tend to rely on our own benevolence and a 2-week course in coaching or something like that. Now, I mentioned the importance of scale here, and this also brings me to a frequent public discussion about there being a competence gap between the supply and demand of competence in the labor market. These claims are rarely questions, but I strongly question them. I claim that as a society, we're simply not good at laying the labor market puzzle. But rather than facing our institutional limitations, we blame it on the puzzle pieces. We say that they are not fit for the labor market. To overcome this, professional career guidance is a crucial part. I claim that there's plenty of evidence for this type of problem solving, but it's still not used and it's still not prioritized. So back to career health. We have thus added an extra problem-solving model focused on resource mining and precision matching. Now, in this service, I explained we have 8 meetings. They are about improving the work relationship or improving the perception of it or about changing the relationship. And it's not focused on reducing these negative norms. That may be an effect of this work, but that's not the starting point. In this work, in our development work, a number of hypotheses about being burned stuck have emerged, and I want to mention some of them. One is that we realize that the individuals we meet have rarely had the opportunity to reflect on their work life in a structured way. They have on average spent maybe 15 years in a school desk acquiring knowledge. Then they've received 15 minutes with a guidance counselor to learn how to manage and build a good working life based on this knowledge. What I'm saying is that a feeling of being stuck in the wrong job sometimes is the result of simply not having the tools to find out that you're in the right place. About 70% of the clients that come to us say, I have to leave this job or I'll fall to pieces. About 70% of these say afterwards, this job is the right place for me. And they've used small adjustment or just had a new perspective. Another experience is that many people need help to see that just leaving for a new job may not solve their problem. They first need to find out exactly, precisely what is wrong in this match. Otherwise, they risk ending up in a similarly harmful situation again. Now, we're talking here about work relationships, but you can compare this to love relationships. And maybe you've been in that situation or you know someone who has been moving from one relationship to the next, and they always end up in the same situation. Simply because they've never stopped, they never had the circumstances where they've been able to realize what is it that is wrong here? What do I need to change? Or what do I need to look for in a relationship for it to work out? Something that might seem obvious, but not always is that independence is extremely important in the professional role here. The clients do not even have to tell their boss that they're using this service. Now, we had a fear when we started this that managers would react negatively. Should external people talk to my employees about their everyday work life without my involvement? And almost never this has happened. On the contrary, these are happy and they're relieved managers because they meet employees that present well-founded proposals for change. instead of vague dissatisfaction, ill health, or sick leave. Another experience is that there's often some type of life change behind. So what used to be a good work situation no longer is a good work situation. For instance, after becoming a parent. And that's not necessarily because there's something wrong with the workplace, but because the individual has chosen or is forced to change priorities in life. So even if the employer adjusts, you still have an identity crisis. Who am I now when I do not have the energy to put into this job? So how does this look more in practice? Well, there are, of course, thousands of good guidance exercises available if you just walk into a good bookstore. But the important thing here is having the right exercises, well presented, built in a way where they can build on each other, and a lot of other issues that are involved here to create a functional process. Now, we've refined the toolbox and the process now every year for 17 years. We have requirements that the clients should be able to do quite a bit of homework. They should also be able to overview their results and to draw conclusions. All these require quite advanced pedagogical solutions. They have to work in a live situation over the phone or a video. They have to work in other languages. All this requires professional training, but not only that, also an organization that can support the profession with interprofessional discussion of clients, etc. In the process that this client experiences, we look at things like life values. So what is important in my life right now or in the next few years? Work values. How can work contribute to what is important in my life? We look at wishes. So what work situations work best for me and which should I avoid? Again, based on my own experience. And of course, language is the central tool in a service like this. So we need to study the verbs, the nouns, and the adjectives that describe the person and the organization respectively. Then there's a matching process. What matches what is right, what is not so good, and what is okay because I get something else that's important to me. And firstly, we look at, can I adjust my job so that it works for me? Secondly, do I need to switch to a job within the organization? And thirdly, should I change jobs outside the organization? If I summarize this problem solving, you could call it a person-centered labor market. You can compare this with healthcare, where there's a discussion now on whether the problem solving, for instance, is centered on the symptoms or the disease, or is it focused on the person? Are we creating a treatment for the tumor or the patient? And we have a similar problem here regarding the labor market. We do need to realize that the core of the labor market is the quality of unique decisions that people make for their own sake. It's a problem solving shaped around people's uniqueness rather than based on categories. It's a problem solving that puts more focus on finding resources than on exploring problems, and a problem solving that meets people as problem solvers rather than problems to solve. All these may seem obvious, but they're far from the solutions I meet in my everyday work when I visit different institutions. All inquiries for research and development we have received over the years have been linked to categories, almost exclusively negative categories. So they come to us and say, we need a solution for immigrants, for our dropouts, for young disabled people. And this includes the requests we have for development. This includes what I see in research funding or political initiatives. At the same time, our empirical evidence is shouting at us year after year that good methodology works for humans. And it works because they are human, not because they belong to categories. For the individual, it doesn't matter that these categories are created by people who wish them well or who try to look out for them. They simply are not useful for these individuals. In my experience, dividing into these groups, it's based on a futile attempt to find structure, but it's actually based on prejudice rather than on empirical evidence. With very few exceptions, in our development work, every time we've tried to adjust our process based on these groups, we're hit in the face by reality. The clients are people, and that's enough. You could say that the requests we receive are about building one hospital for every deviation from averages that an individual may have, instead of building a single guidance service for what all people need. Perhaps a problem here is that the answer is a process. It is more complex to research a process and to communicate a process rather than just to ask questions about categories. But our experience is that even if this process that I talk about is not the whole answer, it's frequently the most important part of the answer, and it's often completely ignored in the institutions we meet. In a very frustrating way, most of what I talk about is common sense. The answers are obvious at the individual level, but they're still not even visible in much of the research. I dedicated a chapter in my latest book to try to understand why we insist on seeking answers in places other than where they seem to be available. The tools are there, it's mainly the implementation is lacking. The profession isn't there, and the institutions are unable to provide independent professional career guidance. So let's take this back to being burned stuck. How can we describe it? For me, it's a situation. Employees and sometimes employers are stuck in a problem solving that is reduced to identifying problems, often problems in each other. They lack an alternative problem solving model, and they lack an independent profession. I told you before that we invited psychologists to study this service, and they use this type of language to describe the problem. So, an individual feeling unease about the coming workday is an indication. An individual feeling that they have unnecessary work tasks. The general state of health or emotional exhaustion. Now, these are before and after measurements, and we can see that the services have clear effects on this. A maybe easier to understand popular version of this may be something like this. You're good at what you do, but you've lost the desire. Or you know that there are tasks that suit you better, but not how to get them. Or simply, you stay in your job because you see no alternative. Now, the 9 first here are different versions of a person seeing a problem, but without the ability to do something about it. Interestingly, employers usually think they are first to see the problem. But my experience is that the employees usually see it first. They just do not know how to deal with it. Now, the 10th sentence here is a way to change the perspectives. You would not apply for the same job again if you were fired today, even if you got the chance. In the original seminar, we ran a breakout room with this question. In what way can burned stuck be relevant in my work? And thank you for your input there. One last thing, it's time to look forward. So in these studies and the services, we see impressive effects. They're on par with cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the world's most studied therapies. We've worked this now for 17 years, 12 years at a large scale, and we've still not seen any similar implementations. If career guidance only has half of the effect that the empirical evidence indicates, it's fantastic. One of the professors that did this study, Gunnar Aronsson, uses a slightly different terminology that has some good nuances. He talks about lock-in, and he says there's occupational lock-in, workplace lock-in, and task lock-in. And he has presented some studies on this in Sweden, and they're available as references in this study. As I mentioned, we largely have the tools to do something about this on an individual level, but there's still much to do. We need to develop a profession. Now, we can continue to develop the service, the training, and the organization here, but I want to mention, for instance, that we're in discussions about creating a higher education on career health in Germany. And I think we need that type of initiative to actually get this rolling in a large scale. Then there's communication. This is a new way of solving problems. And that's both challenging and interesting when you want to communicate. In this case, the employees try to understand the services, but they are limited to base their understanding of it on the problem solving they already know, which means they frequently interpret it as outplacement or help with a CV or something like that. This also means that we miss out on clients that simply cannot ask for something they do not know they can get. So the communication part here is really, really important. And furthermore, it's the prevention part, and these are of course related. Now, being burned stuck seems to be one of the roads into a burnout. At least that's what my clients say. When they saw their solution, they said, I'm not burned out, I've been burned stuck. And they said, initially there was nothing wrong with me or my job. I just didn't do something about it in time when we were growing apart. Since we do not reach all people in time, some of them that originally only needed career health services remain in a problematic situation so long that they also end up needing behavioral therapy, for instance. And this has done that we wanted to create a career health examination. You can compare it with a medical health examination, a type of screening to find these people in time. And we're now looking at using this or trying this out. And the final question is, who can do what? In my textbook, I use this model. I say that in the labor market, there are actors, those that buy and sell work. There are support services, those that walk next to the actors in trying to find solutions. And finally, the architects. They set the framework for the labor market. So firstly, what can the architects do? Well, today we often see the individual as responsible for finding a solution. But when supporting the individual, we only do it with a collective analysis of the situation. What I propose is that instead architects can take on the responsibility for the individual's conditions for making their unique analysis. Why would we do this as architects? Well, because this affects people's health, it affects people's productivity, it affects innovation, it affects structural transformation, and in a way, it's even about justice. All over the world, we put great emphasis on everyone's opportunity for education. And we should put equal emphasis on everyone's opportunity to build the best possible work life based on their resources. Does this exist in Denmark today? If not, which insurance company in Denmark wants to be first, and how can we study it? Or which municipality in Denmark wants to be first, and how can we study it? Or which union in Denmark wants to be first to offer this to their members, and how can we study it? And that brings us to what research can do. And of course, firstly, not settle for studying negative norms or trying to find these simplified causalities. Now, I talked to research funders in Sweden, and most of the funding here is linked to studying problems rather than solutions, with the hope of finding simple causalities for groups that are negatively defined. I would say that if there was a 10% likelihood that we could improve the use of forestry resources with 10%, say, we would be flooded with government money. Not so with human resources, and there's a lot of work to be done there. But we have all of these different disciplines. And how can we use that as researchers? Well, if you work in career guidance, befriend an economist. Guide them to studying the right numbers. Befriend a psychologist. They are themselves struggling with a history of focusing on helping people with problems rather than helping them lead good lives and work lives. We can increase the attention to the power of career guidance by setting up research that shows effect. When you start talking about a 60% drop in sick leave, you're quite a bit more likely to get attention for career guidance. Or 50% lower youth unemployment, you will also get more attention for career guidance. We might also need to show the extent of people being burned stuck, like Gunnar Aronson has done in Sweden. And we need to show the potential that we as a society miss out on. Maybe also researchers can turn to citizens to create a momentum for the research, because there seems to be quite a demand for information on this, and I believe Ria can confirm this when she started to talk about being fastbrændthed in Denmark. Now, a question I'd like to share with you is, do these services in career health lead to an increase or a decrease in mobility in the labor market? Well, firstly, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that it leads to well-founded mobility. But I still think it's an interesting question. And if you would measure this on average, I think the answer would actually be reduced mobility. But I do think this is an interesting research question. But the important thing here is, of course, well-founded mobility, not big or small, as is often discussed. What can the different support institutions do then? Well, I and many with me claim that there's a need for career training and education. It's not okay to educate without also exploring the use of the knowledge for the individual. And many with me would also say that there's a need for access to lifelong independent career guidance. So there are many of us who want to provide better conditions for career guidance. But I would say that the career guidance counselors in Sweden tend to make one big mistake. When they try to improve this, they talk about their own importance and their own work conditions. And it's interpreted by others as something that will benefit them, instead of using arguments that show the effects for society, which is where I decided to start the seminar. All these social issues depend on the quality of the decisions that people make about their work lives. Those with a job are usually outside the attention radar here. But being burned stuck is just one of many important matching problems where professional career guidance can make a big difference. In Sweden, the result of focusing on the guidance counselors rather than on the benefits of career counseling to society is that career guidance is not taken seriously, and it's treated as an appendix to the education industry. We should be able to do that, and there's a lot at stake. Thank you so much for your attention. For those of you who do feel comfortable with the Swedish language, there's textbooks, there's research, case studies, podcasts, etc. And you're very welcome to contact me with any questions or ideas you want to discuss. Thank you so much for your time.